So the Sifsei Chaim says, and he's talking about, again, the difference between the way that we look at Chachma and Chachmas Torah versus the idea of the Yavanim and how they looked at really Chachmas Teva, right? Just wisdom in general. And he talks about that as being the way that they look at it as something that is it's not a positive, it's more of a negative. So he says a taiva hashlilis hazu kayemes be'anushis ad hayom hazen. He says that this continues, until modern times. Kimao tafkid shel hamadam umataraso. He says, what is, at the end of the day, what is the idea of sort of this studying nature, the sciences, all of that? What is the goal and the objective of it? It says l'ishtamesh b'teva ach v'rak kedei lehanaim ulahakel es chai hadam. So on the one hand, it's clearly to try and make life easier for us and more comfortable for us, to use science in those ways, right? We certainly see that around us, right? The homes that we live in and all of that, electricity. However, it's not in order to bring us to any type of completeness as people. Right? It's not the notion of personal growth, at least the way that we look at personal growth, is something that is much more, that's from Chachmas Torah. I feel that Matorah shel hamada l'shaperes ha'echos ha'chaim, but he says, but even when you look at the goal of improving the quality of life, he bepoa bedarga shnia, he says that's really only secondary. V'ilu bedarga rishona minutzo hamada bechelko hagadol hachrivas ha'olam. So really the primary goal is actually destructive. And he says v'hu mishamish ke'emtsoi lagboras hashchisus anoshis. And really, it's a means. The knowledge technology is a means to become more mighty and to be able to, sort of exert your might over others. And he says that really what they're trying to do is expand all of the different weapons we have for war. It says, and it's only after the fact that we try to look for, that we try to utilize those same ideas or technologies or what have you for peaceful ideas. And he says, as koach ha'adam. So he uses the idea of the atom, right? Pischu kedei la'aros. Originally, it was to destroy. So he says only after the fact, right, did we try to build nuclear reactors for electricity and for anything that was more positive or more peaceful. And I was thinking, I mean, this is I think he was nifter, I think in the late 80s, early 90s. But I was thinking, just something that we use daily for our lives, the internet. How did it start? It was funded by DARPA, by a subsection of the DoD. And I was thinking, I think there's plenty of other examples, but I think he has a really interesting insight there that, unfortunately, a lot of the investment and a lot of what we see is really for purposes of war, not necessarily for peace. So there's that insight right there. He says, "Hashkafa apsula hazu." Shoshotana Adam bibria al yedei hamada bekoch sichlam bibli lishlot al atzmo lishabed as ritzon so that's ritzon Hashem. And he says, broadly speaking, this is really the difference between us and the way the Yavanim and the way the modern world looks at it is, far too often knowledge and technology and all that is used to try and grow your influence, your strength, your might, and all that, as opposed to the way we look at Chachmas Torah, which is to be meshabed ourselves to what does Hashem want from us? What should we be doing now? What's incumbent upon us? And he says, so it was a little bit further. He says, Hashem Yisbarach kava betziva ha'adam yishla bebria kakosov umilo es ha'aretz v'kivshuha urdu bidgasayam ba'of hashamayim v'chol chaya haromeses al haaretz. So, quoting from the pasuk in Bereshis, right, we do have this idea of being commanded to to control, to rule over the bria, the world around us. He says, "Ach al kach darshu Chazal im zaka roda b'chayus b'behemas." He says, if we are, the Chazal say, if we are zocha, then we will be able to rule over the animals, the world as it is. Lo zacha nase yer lifnei v'haysa moshleshes bo. But if we are not zocha, then we will sort of become secondary or degraded before them, and they will end up ruling over us. Klomar im zocha. What does it mean im zaka? Imhu mizachech es atzmo. Not so much zocha, but to purify. The word of mizachech, to purify yourself, and your midos v'oser karatzon Hashem yisbarach. When we are zocha, meaning that we're doing what we're supposed to be doing. Who wrote a bit nivram aliyonim v'tachtonim and asa shuto l'kadosh baruch hu. Then we can have power over the creations, the world around us, including what's going on even in the ruchnius area, in the loftier areas, and we become a partner to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Aval im lo zocha kasher eno mizacheches pnimioso. But when we don't try to purify ourselves and do what we're supposed to be doing, eno sholet al atzma v'choshev arakli shleit al ha'acher lemili tavosav. We're not trying to rule over ourselves, but rather we're trying to rule over everyone around us in order to fulfill our desires. Azu hayirud mikol habrios heim b'ma'alosa ruchnius v'heim begashmius, and therefore we will become secondary. We'll sort of degrade ourselves from all of the creatures around us, whether we're talking about in ruchnius or in gashmius ways. Shekochos hateva v'nivraim because everybody around us that even lower than us will rule over us. Hayavanim amnam kafru v'lo chavtzu lishalit al habriya kedarkam sho Yisrael. The Yivanim were not trying to do this. Their idea was not to try and emulate Yisrael. They were not trying to make themselves better. Rather, they were just trying to use that their knowledge and their strengths for the world around them. But they also were envious and jealous of what we were able to achieve through Chachmas HaTorah. Alkein ratzu lekachas me'am Yisrael es ma'alasam lenatek es hakesher shebein am Yisrael lebein Hashem Yisbarach. And their and this is what he was saying, that their gzeros were meant to cut us off from our relationship with the Kadosh Baruch Hu. Kadei sheyu heim v'lo am Yisrael ha'am ha'nivchar mikol ha'amim b'chachmasam, in order that they themselves should become like that chosen nation in terms of their understanding and knowledge and all that, but not in terms of getting closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Misibazu darshu miYisrael sheyatzhiru ein lanu chelak shutfus be'elokei Yisrael. So this is how he's wrapping up the idea of the fact that we are supposed to write on the cairn, the cairn of the shore, that in lanu chelak be'elokei Yisrael. What does that mean? And he says, what does it mean a chelek? How do we have a chelek in a Kadosh Baruch Hu? It means a shutfa. So we have a partnership, that when we're doing what we're supposed to be doing, we become partners. They are telling us, no, you have no chelek, you have no shutfas, and we're going to enact gezeros in order to prevent you from having that relationship. So that's how he, how he separates between us and understanding. The chachma of Yavan we talked about last week is that on the one hand, Chazal even talked about the beauty of Yavan, but on the other hand, we talk about it as being a darkness, and this is how he sort of sums up that idea of it being a darkness. So now we're going to move on, and this is a little bit further in. We're skipping some pages, some sections. And he's really, a lot of this just builds upon what he's talked about. So he gets back to Al Hanisim, the words in Al Hanisim, and understanding Masarta Giborim B'Yad Chalashim. But now we're going to take it a step further and try to understand it on a different link, on a bit of a different angle. So He says, "Od Metzina b'Gemara, Amar Reb Asi Lama Nimshula Esther l'Shachar." So, and now we're going to see a little bit of a connection between Purim and Hanukah, but really what the difference is. So the Gemara says that asks, why was Esther compared to Shachar? Lomar lecha ma Shachar sof kol halayla, that just as the Shachar, I mean the first of light, right, is the end of the night, af Esther sof kol hanisim. So too, Esther became the end of all of the nisim, the miracles. So that certainly requires a little bit of explanation what that means. So Hiksha Hamarsha asks in this Chidushi Agaros in the Gemara, it says, Lichara Hatsaros Nimshalu Bekomakam Alayla. And generally speaking, we see tsaros in life as being compared to being the Laila, right? Nighttime is that time of when things are scary and when things are difficult. The Haga'ula Liyam, but the good things, like the Geula, that is compared to being daytime. So then, in that respect, or according to the general guidelines of what we see in Chazal, Esther should be compared to the Erev. Ma Erev sof kol hayom, that just as the evening is the end of the daytime. Af Esther sof kol hanisim shenimshalu liyom. So too, Esther would be the end of all the nisim that are, again, compared to being daytime when we had that relationship with Hashem. Omikach shechazal himshlu Esther l'shachar shacharav b'hayom hameir yoser. But since they're comparing Esther to the shachar, where afterwards it's you're getting more light, spiritual light. Mashmem b'divreihem she'achar Purim mitchila or matzchila tkufa nisim meir yoser v'yesh lahavin pashadavar. And therefore, according to the way that Chazal set this up, that Esther is the end of, is Shachar, that should mean that after Purim, after the Purim story, we should be seeing additional Nisim, because this is now daytime, we should be seeing more of this, not less. So what does that mean? So we have to understand it. Okay. So this is the Chuvas, L'She'elos, Tmunos, Behavanas. What's that?
How come up Maseches Yoma, that Esther and Hanukkah would be in Yoma? Isn't that a strange place for it?
That's a good question. That is a good question. Why isn't this in Maseches Megillah? I don't have an answer for that. That's the
okay.
thing.
I haven't learned Yoma, so I have no idea.
Yeah. So he answers the answers to these questions are really hidden in how we understand the essence of Bayis Sheni. Hine sholim madua ha-nevim kimat velo nivu al tkufas Bayis Sheni. And they ask, why were there no Nevi'im, basically, I mean, it's kimat, no Nevi'im, that were prophesying on the tkufa of Bayis Sheni. Ella al tkufas Bayis Rishon, o galus arucha v'agula ha'asira shashlema u'beis hamikdash shlishi. Really, he says, there's really, I guess, two categories of nevuah that we see. All the nevuahs about the destruction of the first Beis Hamikdash, right? That warning Bnei Yisrael, right, during the times that we are in Eretz Yisrael with Bayis Rishon, of all the terrible things that were going to happen to us, and that ultimately did under Nebuchadnezzar. Or that's the first category. The second category is the prophecies of the final redemption that would happen in the future. But he says there's really nothing about, and if we think about it, there really isn't much about what was going on during Bayis Sheni. Bayis Sheni lo nivne ve'af lo haya amar lihio satachlis shel hageula shlema. And he says, really, Bayis Sheni was never considered to be the Geula Shlema, right? It was when it was built. Ukvar be'ez shenivne haya yadua lechazar shehu asid le'charif. And he said, and even to the point where when it was being built, Chazal understood that it would be in the future, it would be destroyed. K'mavur b'Gemara, umikdash sheni nehidi yedinin lahon diyichrov. Right, that it was granted, it was known that it would be destroyed. So Amar Abaye lo yedinin lemasai, but Abaye asked the question. They didn't know when it would be destroyed. Baksiv, what do you mean they didn't know? The pasuk in Daniel says, Shvuim shivim nechtach al amcha v'al ir kachecho bir ha meforshin dahainu shivim shmito shehin taf tzadi shanim. Right, without getting into the whole calculation here, but this pasuk in Daniel is darshaned out that there's 70 cycles of the Shemitah, and that comes out to be your 490 years, which is basically the 70 years of Galus in Bavel, and in addition to the 420 years, right, of when the Bayis Sheni was what was erect before it was destroyed by the Romans. So he says, "Kol mehus Bayis Sheni, amors sheiru bo hayu haschala shal galus arucha vishavi hachona likrosa lechen envim miatu ledaber al Bayis Sheni ketkufa bifnei atzma." Yes, be'etzem Bayis Sheni hu chilek ma'galus arucha v'achronesh she'aleha divu ravos. So he says that really what's going on here is that Bayis Sheni was already considered to be part of the extended galus that we are currently in. In other words, it wasn't considered to be something that was separate from, we don't have the galus from Bayis Rishon and then something intermediary, and now the galus that we're in. It's really one continuous galus. And we talked about this earlier, where the Sifsei Chaim also talked about the idea that even the galus during the holiday of Hanukah is a little bit different than what we think about typically, because we're actually in Eretz Yisrael during this time. At least we could be, right? We certainly had a lot of communities of Jews who didn't go back to Eretz Yisrael, but we certainly could be there. We had the land, and yet it's still considered to be galus Yavan. So it's the idea again that this is really a part of the extended galus that we're currently in. Excuse me. Okay, so he says Narchiv Ktsas bebir hadvarv im chorban Bayis Rishon nistayma tekufa ba'am Yisrael tekufa ma'ula yoser tekufas shalach hareha. So let's really try to understand this idea a little bit more, he says, and expand upon it. He says, and actually, you know what, why don't we, just knowing that we're running out of time, I'm going to just skip to going back to Tekufas Bayis Sheni. So we'll leave that idea for a moment and just take a look at Bayis Sheni. He says, Miata hitzchila tekufa prichas Torah shabal peh. He talks about the idea that during Bayis Sheni, that's really the flowering, the expansion of Torah Shabbat Peh. K'moshe arichu Chazal hayacholis letar shelo ratzu livnos as habayis Sheni ad shehuftechu min hashemayim shezachu leTorah Shabbat Peh bebehirus ubeshleimus l'ribu talmidim l'gili razi Torah. That there's this idea that Bayis Sheni, the Chazal were very concerned about the building of Bayis Sheni until there was this expansion of Torah Shabbat Peh. That there needed to be this expansion of Torah coming out of Bavel, where those who were returning to Eretz Yisrael were not in great shape in terms of just their understanding of Torah, of halacha, and etc. And that without having this real expansion of Torah Shabbat Peh and revealing a lot of the hidden parts of the Torah to more of the masses, Yoser me'asher be'avar, more so than it had ever been done previously. You think about it, that's where you have Anshe Knesset Hagadola formulating all of the davening that we have today. We have the building of the or the compilation of Mishnayos, of the Brises, of the Toseftas. Amru Chazal, Anshe Knesset Hagadola, Hem Amru v'chizu bilvad Amru ela dvarim elu hayu regilim lomar. Midu Talmidim Harbe. They were these are things that they were talking about all the time, and this is something that they were trying to build was more and more Talmidim. Sig Torah, and building, right, the Gedorim, the fences that we know that Chazal built. Hari af es Kol sidre tfilas v'habrocha shebiyadenu tiknu anshe knesses hagadola. And all the davening that we have today was can be taken all the way back to anshe knesses hagadola during this period of time. All right. So a little bit forward again. So this is echad hameoros hamerkazim sheiru b'mei bayisheni hayu gzer sayavanim. V'mesiras hanefesh shel hachashmonayim she'ein haya hanisim v'nivla she'asu lahem asher mizbarach b'melchamos bechlal b'neis hashemesh b'mikdash b'mei Hanukah b'prat. So now getting back to this idea, and again, we spoke about this before. The Sifsei Chaim is now sort of just expanding on it and looking at it at a different angle, but talking about the idea that it was during this period of time where, on the one hand, we see that we were not really doing what we were supposed to be doing in terms of our avodas Hashem. We were relaxing from it. Then the Yevanim made their gzeros, for instance, not allowing us to be in the Beis HaMikdash and have the Korban Tamid, right? We talked about that. And it was only the Mesiras Nefesh of the Chashmonayim that allowed for the miracle and then allowed for all of what happened of us being able to overcome the Malchus of Yavan, at least in terms of being able to have the Beis HaMikdash again in our hands and to be able to restore Korbanos and that sort of thing. I just want to see if we can get a little bit further. So he says, "Lefi yisod zed navin as divrei Gemara shepurim hu sof kol hanisim v'lo Chanukah." Right. So getting back to what he was talking about, that Purim is considered to be the end of the Nisim and not Chanukah, mipnei shenishin lichtov Megillas Esther, because Purim is the last episode, I guess, if you will, that's actually written down, right? That became part of Tanakh. Aval Chanukah lo nitin lichtov, but the Chanukah story did not become part of Tanakh. So why wasn't that? Why weren't why didn't the miracles of Chanukah warrant being part of, becoming part of Tanakh? Everything, including up until and including Purim, were really relevant as part of our history, part of the past. And not, and there's no continuation of it. Clearly, he wants to show, and he talks about this for the other holidays as well, is that there is certainly an influence. There is a power of all the holidays that we have, even though they are really only shaykh to the past. When we celebrate them, there's something that we can tap into, but there's no continuation of them into the present. And therefore they're written down in order to remember and to give thanks, for them to Hashem. But what happened in Hanukah was not only relegated to the past, and therefore they weren't written down as part of Tanakh because they haven't been completed yet. They're still relevant today. Because we are still in this same Hanhaga even until today, until the present day. Nes Chanukah is something that is continuous. It continues throughout. Velo rak chozer misorer midi pam bepam, and it's not something that just sort of we wake up to, periodically. Ki maya mehus bagdor shel Chanukah Yeshua nisim the kumi haruchni shel hauma. Because what's the essence of Chanukah? It's the saving and the miracles that were mekayim the ruchnius of us as a nation. And this is and this is something that lasts throughout this long galus. This is, again, starting from the end of the first Beis HaMikdash all the way until the future Beis Hamikdash is built. Yeshba Shersheros Nisim Asher Bishvil Bishalvel Harishonim Hayu Nisi Chanukah Nimshechas Haya Midor Ledor Ad Lesi Letachlis Benisa Geula Shlema Ubizgalos Mashiach Tzidkenu Shal Nisim Elu Amru Chazal Shaf Nisi Yitzias Mitzrayim Yihu Tfilim Leumasam, as even as Chazal say that as great as the miracles were during Yitzias Mitzrayim and Kriyas Yamsuf, they will pale in comparison to the Nisim that will come in at the end of days. Hanesa Gadol Atzum Hatmidi Sheb'Tkufas Hester Hapane V'Choshech Shebegalus Hu Kiyum Am Yisrael. And he said the greatest miracle, when you think about it, is the fact that we're still here. And certainly, I think he can say this, as being one of those who were, came to Eretz Yisrael in the early days of Eretz Yisrael, and saw the recreation really of the Shiva world in Israel after the war. I think we're going to have to stop here, but this is one of his major points: is that this is not the Hanukah is not the end of Nisim; it's the beginning of Nisim. Purim was the end of the Nisim that we saw, that were more spectacular, that were more understood and revealed to the masses. Hanukah becomes part of the miracles that continue through the entire Galus, and it's all about the fact that we're still here, and we shouldn't be, especially, after the Holocaust, there's no reason why we should still be here as a nation, and yet here we are. So there's so much more that he goes into, but unfortunately, I think we have to stop here.
Does he use the words Eretz Yisrael?
I don't. That's a good question. You mean in terms of
since 48, he was there.
Oh, of the Medina.
The Medinasi, right? Medinasius.
You're asking like how did he feel about the Hakamas of the Medina? I don't know. He doesn't talk about that here. So I don't know. That's an interesting question. And I don't want to answer one way or the other off the top of my head because I don't know.
Because the whole war in 1948, you could say Rabim Biad Miyatim, all the things that Hanukah.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that the truth is, no, I think in terms of that, absolutely. I don't think anybody would disagree. I mean, outside of maybe just small pockets.
That fosters his idea about continuation of the Nace.
Right. Absolutely. No, I think you're absolutely right. And, especially when you're talking about, Me'afila Leora, I mean, what bigger example of going from Afila to Ora than absolutely. And I think many talk about that. So I think I don't know if he mentioned that specifically here, but I think that's really certainly where he's going with this. And unfortunately, he will get into what is the machlokas between Shammai and Hillel in terms of, do we start with 8 candles and go down, or do we start with 1 candle build up? And he actually ties it to this, the idea that that from Beis Shammai's point of view, we're looking at the fact that because it's compared to the porei of Sukkos, where the number of Purim go down every day, similar to, and that's the Gemara talks about. That's why Shammai did that. And he's talking about that's connected to the Nisim, because the Nisim Gluyim went, discontinued after Bayis Rishon, and that's what Shammai is going after. Beis Hillel is going after the fact that no, the Nisim continue and expand all the way up until the Geula Shlema. And that's a much deeper idea of what was really, going on behind that machlokas. So with that, we'll stop here.